Have you ever walked into a room and felt every eye pause just for a second before glancing away as if you were the shadow no one invited? My name is Charlotte Hale, and this is the story of the night I stepped into my younger sister's wedding alone. By choice, carrying 1,000 old aches and a quiet kind of hope. It wasn't loneliness that weighed on me, but the memory of all those times I had tried to shrink myself to fit the spaces my family left empty for me. The ballroom was breathtaking, golden chandeliers sparkling like captured star strings of music drifting through the air. Everywhere I looked, there were perfect smiles and polished shoes, champagne flutes raised in celebration. But beneath the surface, I could sense the stories hidden in glances and whispered words, the way people like to catalog you. The successful one, the single one, the one who should have brought someone. There's a special brand of courage in walking alone into a room built for couples, for families, for everyone but you. Growing up, I used to believe that if I just worked a little harder, was a little kinder, maybe I could earn my place in the story my family wrote so easily for themselves. My sister Madeline, she was sunshine laughter, the first picked for every team. I was quieter, always searching for meaning in numbers, in late-night projects, in things that didn't sparkle at the dinner table. Somewhere along the way, I learned that some rooms are built to keep people like me at the edge of the light. But tonight I wasn't there to win anyone's approval or to play the part of the silent sister. I had come because after so many years of waiting for someone else to give me permission, I finally realized I could choose myself. This isn't a story about revenge or making a scene. It's about reclaiming your own place in the world, even if you have to stand in the back row to do it. And sometimes all it takes is one unexpected moment, one person who sees you differently, to change the shape of everything. If you've ever felt like the outsider at your own family's table, if you've ever wondered whether your story is worth telling, this is for you. In the next half hour, I want to share not just what happened that night, but the journey that brought me there, the quiet victories, the small betrayals, the lesson I learned about letting go of the need to be seen. Because sometimes the greatest freedom isn't when the world finally applauds you, it's when you realize you don't need them to. So come with me, step into the ballroom. Let's begin. In every family, there's an unspoken script, a pattern of glances and gestures that quietly decides who gets to be the star. For us, Madeline was the golden child from the start. I still remember the way she would twirl in our grandmother's living room, laughter bubbling over as our relatives clapped and called her an angel. When she brought home a ribbon from her first dance recital, it found a place on the mantel within hours. My spelling bee trophies, on the other hand, gathered dust on my bookshelf quietly out of sight. No one meant to be cruel. Sometimes favoritism slips in with the smallest habits. It's funny how those small moments stack up. Birthdays blurred together, hers were always a celebration cake and balloons and a house full of guests. Mine, sometimes, there was a candle, maybe a card. Always the promise of next year, we'll do something bigger. At first I didn't mind. I buried myself in books finding wonder in science kits, and puzzles chasing the thrill of a problem solved. But as the years went on, I couldn't help but notice the difference. Every family photo seemed to cast me in the shadows, while Madeline glowed at the center. Realizing you're the other sibling isn't a single moment, it's a slow dawning. I remember the time our school held an open house for science projects. I had stayed up late for a week building a miniature solar panel from old CDs and bits of wire. When my parents arrived, they drifted over to Madeline's table first, cheering at her hand-painted flower pot. By the time they reached me, most parents had already gone home. "That's nice, Charlotte," my mom said, distracted eyes already scanning for Madeline's next performance. Those little stings become the soundtrack of growing up. It's a pattern I've seen echoed in so many stories. Friends who grew up as the quiet one, the responsible one, or simply the backup plan. In America, we love to celebrate the extraordinary, but sometimes the loudest applause is reserved for those who fit a certain mold. Psychologists call it family role assignment, and studies show it shapes how we see ourselves well into adulthood. When you're cast as the supporting character in your own family, it's easy to start believing that's all you'll ever be. But there's a hidden gift in being the quiet observer. Over time, I learned to find joy in small wins, to appreciate the beauty in solving a tough equation or building something no one else noticed. The ache of being overlooked gave me the room to grow in ways that didn't rely on applause. The lesson I carry is this: sometimes being in the shadows teaches you how to create your own light, steady, soft, and lasting, even when no one else is watching. As I stood at the edge of that lavish wedding, memories of those childhood banquets echoed inside me. I knew I had walked a different path, not because I wanted to, but because that was the only road left open. And yet, as the evening pressed on, I would come to see that sometimes the outsider holds a perspective no one else dares to claim. That realization would become my quiet source of strength, and it was about to matter more than I ever expected. While Madeline's world shimmered with spotlights, mine glowed quietly in the hum of late-night computer screens. From the outside, people saw my success and called it natural, but nothing about it was easy. My first internship in college paid so little that I lived on microwave noodles and borrowed textbooks. There were nights when rejection emails piled up, each one landing like a fresh bruise. In the male-dominated tech spaces I entered, my ideas were sometimes overlooked until someone else repeated them more loudly. The challenge wasn't just proving my worth, it was learning to speak up even when no one wanted to listen. I remember one investor meeting in particular, a conference room lined with portraits of men in polished suits. My startup had built an app to help working moms track their kids' allergies, but the room's skepticism was palpable. One executive leaned back, arms crossed, and asked if I was sure I'd have time for a business once I started a family. His words stung not because he doubted my app, but because he doubted my very place at the table. Even so, I kept pitching, drawing strength from every setback. I knew deep down that success wasn't about applause, but about persistence. Stories like mine aren't rare. Across the country, I've met women who've quietly built empires from the ground up. Nurses working double shifts, teachers moonlighting as entrepreneurs, single mothers studying for degrees after bedtime. We talk about breaking the glass ceiling, but we rarely mention the loneliness that comes with each crack. There's a silent cost to ambition, especially when the world expects you to apologize for dreaming too big. American culture loves the idea of the self-made woman, but too often her struggles are packaged as inspiration without acknowledging the daily grind and the scars that come with it. There's also the myth of balance, this expectation that women can juggle flawless careers, perfect homes, and endless relationships without dropping a single plate. In reality, there were weeks when my apartment looked like a tornado had hit, when friends' texts went unanswered, when exhaustion felt like my only companion. It's easy to scroll through highlight reels on social media and feel behind, but real life is built from messy, unfiltered moments. The lesson I learned is simple. You don't have to do it all at once, and you don't have to do it alone. Asking for help is its own kind of strength. As I watched the wedding guests gather around Madeline that night, it struck me how easy it is to mistake visibility for value. The loudest voices aren't always the most original, and the shiniest paths aren't always the most meaningful. My journey had been slow, unglamorous, but deeply my own. Little did I know those quiet years of building in the dark were about to bring me into the spotlight in a way I never could have predicted. And sometimes it's the ones who learn to thrive unnoticed who surprise everyone, most of all themselves. Weddings have a way of magnifying every family dynamic, putting old wounds and roles on full display beneath the soft glow of chandeliers. As I found my seat near the back, I noticed how carefully everything was arranged, guests paired off like a living diorama, every detail curated for the perfect photograph. Madeline stood front and center, radiant, and adored her new in-laws, circling her with practiced affection. I could feel their glances drift toward me, lingering just long enough to remind me that here I was more of a footnote than a guest. Sometimes being included is simply another way of being set apart. The Carter family's rituals were as polished as their shoes. I watched them pass stories and inside jokes across the table, their laughter rising and falling in gentle waves. An aunt leaned over, voice dripping with the kind of sweetness that stings, and said, "You must be Charlotte, the career one." She smiled as if it was a compliment, though the space between her words told another story. "I always assumed you'd bring someone." I smiled politely, unwilling to offer an explanation for my solitude. There's a certain strength in refusing to apologize for the life you've chosen, even when others treat it as a problem to be fixed. These moments weren't new. At almost every major event, graduations, birthdays, family reunions, I'd felt the subtle sting of being almost but not quite what others expected. In American culture, especially among families chasing status, there's a delicate art to social exclusion. You're invited, you're photographed, but you're also reminded with a word or a glance that you don't quite fit the mold. I thought of a friend who'd once confessed that, at her brother's wedding, she'd been introduced as the one who hasn't settled down yet. We carry these little titles like secret badges, invisible to everyone except ourselves. But there's a hidden lesson in these carefully staged displays. The more I observed, the more I realized how much energy families can pour into appearances, into making sure every napkin is monogrammed and every smile practiced. The pursuit of perfection can become its own kind of prison, one that traps everyone inside their assigned roles. Real connection, I learned, comes not from flawless presentation, but from honest moments, even if they're a little messy around the edges. It's easy to envy the spotlight, but sometimes the view from the sidelines offers the clearest perspective. As the music swelled and the photographer called for another round of family portraits, I caught Madeline's eye across the room. For just a moment, I wondered if she ever felt the weight of her own role, the pressure to shine, to never falter, to always be the center of attention. Weddings, for all their glitter, can leave everyone feeling a little exposed. I settled into my seat, quietly grateful for the distance, not knowing that the evening was about to take a turn that would bring every hidden story mine included into the light. There are moments in life when time seems to pause, stretching just long enough for something extraordinary to break through the ordinary. That moment arrived as the wedding reception carried on, laughter echoing and glasses clinking, while I quietly blended into the background. Suddenly, a chair scraped the polished floor near the main table, the sound slicing through the polite conversation. All eyes turned toward Victor Ellis, the groom's uncle, a man whose reputation in business circles often preceded him, yet who carried himself with gentle authority. He rose slowly, his gaze fixed not on the bride or the happy couple, but directly on me. The hush that fell over the room was almost physical, as if the chandeliers themselves held their breath. Victor walked purposefully across the crowded floor, his every step drawing whispers and curious stares. When he reached me, he did something no one could have expected. He bowed deeply and deliberately, as though greeting a dignitary. In that single gesture, years of being overlooked and underestimated seemed to dissolve. There's something powerful in being recognized, not just seen, but truly acknowledged for who you are and what you've accomplished, especially when you least expect it and most need it. For a heartbeat, I wondered if it was a dream, if the years I'd spent striving in the shadows had finally yielded some secret reward. Victor straightened his eyes, warm with something like admiration. "Charlotte Hale," he said, his voice clear but gentle. "I followed your work for years. Your insights changed the way our company approached a crucial investment. I wanted to thank you." Around us, people shifted, recalibrating old judgments. The woman they'd whispered about was suddenly worthy of a beau, and it shook the foundation of every assumption in the room. This experience reminded me of a story I once read about a young scientist whose breakthrough went unnoticed until a single mentor spoke her name in the right room. Sometimes that's all it takes, a single person brave enough to see you differently to spark a new narrative. In American culture, we often talk about self-made success, but we forget the power of an unexpected advocate, the way one gesture can rewrite years of quiet effort. The lesson here is clear: recognition, when it comes, can arrive from the most unlikely places, and it can change everything, even if only for a moment. As the ripple of Victor's gesture spread through the wedding hall, I felt a subtle shift within myself. For the first time that evening, I stood a little taller, not out of pride, but out of relief. The room that had once felt so cold was now alive with possibility. Victor's bow was more than an act of courtesy. It was an invitation to believe, if only for an instant, that my story mattered too. What I didn't know then was that this moment of visibility would be the key that unlocked a far deeper conversation and a kind of respect I never thought I'd find among the very people who had always kept me at arm's length. After the ripple of surprise faded, Victor Ellis gestured for me to join him outside, away from the hum of the reception and the curious eyes inside. The terrace was washed and quiet, the city lights soft against the night sky. For a moment we stood together in a companionable silence, both of us wrapped in our thoughts. Victor's presence was reassuring, not overwhelming. When he spoke, it wasn't the booming voice of a business mogul, but something gentler, almost fatherly. "I meant what I said in there, Charlotte," he told me. "You don't just build companies, you build possibilities for people." His words felt different from any compliment I'd ever received in a boardroom or at an awards dinner. Too often, recognition comes as a fleeting headline or a plaque on the wall, easily forgotten once the next big thing arrives. But here, away from the spotlight, it felt honest and lasting. Victor went on to describe how my research had shifted the direction of a major project at his company, saving jobs and creating new opportunities. Hearing the real-world impact of my work, spoken not in the language of profit, but of lives changed, gave me a quiet, unfamiliar sense of pride. I thought about all the women I've met over the years, who have done brilliant things behind the scenes. Engineers who design life-saving technology, teachers who inspire struggling students, nurses who comfort families in their darkest hours. So often their stories remain unsung, their names known only to a grateful few. In America, we celebrate grand gestures, but we sometimes overlook the quiet revolutions unfolding every day. Victor's recognition reminded me that real validation is never just about applause. It's about being understood and valued for the things that matter most. There's a lesson I carry from that night. External praise is a gift, but it should never become our compass. True fulfillment comes from knowing the worth of what you build, even if most people will never see it. Recognition, especially from someone who sees you fully, can be healing, but it can't replace the deeper work of honoring yourself. The applause will fade, the headlines will move on, but the impact of your work and your integrity remains. I realized that night that I didn't need to perform for the approval of the room, not when I already knew the value of my journey. As we walked back toward the ballroom, Victor's words echoed in my mind, planting seeds of self-respect, where old doubts had taken root. I wasn't sure what the rest of the evening would bring, but I knew something fundamental had shifted. This quiet conversation had reminded me that sometimes the most powerful moments happen in the spaces between the applause. And as the doors opened and the music called us back inside, I felt ready to meet whatever and whoever was waiting for me next. When I stepped back into the ballroom, the energy felt subtly different. Eyes that once slid over me now lingered with curiosity or second guesses. It was a strange, delicate power, one that I wore carefully, knowing how quickly the mood in a family can shift. I barely reached my table before Madeline appeared at my side. Her cheeks flushed not with joy, but with frustration. "Why did you let him do that?" she whispered, her voice tight. For years we'd both been playing roles assigned to us. Her the golden child, me, the outsider never quite able to rewrite the script. Her question echoed with more than wedding day anxiety. In so many families, there's an unwritten rule that you don't break character, that you stay in the lane paved for you long ago. When someone steps out of line, whether by achieving something unexpected or simply refusing to shrink, the narrative buckles. Madeline's resentment wasn't just about the bow. It was about the story she'd been told all her life. I saw for the first time that her perfection came with its own chains. Realizing this, I softened. "I didn't ask for it, Maddie," I said gently. "But maybe it's time we both stopped letting other people write our story." I've witnessed this pattern in other families too. Siblings who can't escape childhood labels, parents who cling to familiar dynamics, and children who never outgrow being the shy one or the rebel. In America, our fascination with family narratives can box us in making change feel like betrayal. A friend once told me how her brother still called her the flake at every holiday, despite years of steady, quiet achievements. These stories shape our self-image and our relationships sometimes for decades. Stepping out of those stories can be painful, but it's the only way to grow. That night, my exchange with Madeline didn't end with a dramatic reconciliation or a tearful embrace. It ended with honesty. "You always made me feel like I was too much," I admitted, "while you felt like you were never enough." The words hung between us, not as accusations, but as a kind of truth that both hurt and healed. The lesson I learned is that breaking free from old scripts isn't about blaming anyone. It's about seeing each other clearly, flaws and all. Sometimes just naming the pain is the first real step toward change. As Madeline walked away, I felt the old ache of distance between us, but it was tempered by a new sense of peace. I didn't need to fit a label, and neither did she. Our stories, tangled as they were, could evolve if only we were willing to let them. The night was far from over, and as I watched the family gather for the final toast, I sensed that another unexpected moment was waiting just around the corner, ready to test everything I thought I knew about being seen. As the night drew on, the wedding's energy reached its final crescendo. The DJ faded out the music, and glasses chimed as Andrew's father, Mr. Carter, stood to give his toast. His words flowed easily, praising Madeline's beauty and the strength of the Carter legacy. Then, in a practiced gesture, he lifted his glass to all family, those who have found their place at the table, and those who prefer the boardroom to the ballroom. A few polite chuckles followed, but beneath them I sensed an old familiar sting. It was a reminder that for some, success is only ever almost enough. Before the laughter could settle, Victor Ellis cleared his throat and rose once more, commanding the room's attention without a single raised voice. "If I may," he said, "I'd like to add something." He looked around, pausing just long enough for even the servers to lean in. It takes very little talent to inherit a fortune or marry into it, but it takes vision and courage to create something from nothing. Then, turning toward me, he added, "Tonight I raise my glass to Charlotte Hale, a builder, a leader, and someone who has earned every place she's ever stood." The air changed, curiosity replaced by something close to awe. For a moment, I didn't know what to do with that kind of spotlight. Faces that once dismissed me now flushed with surprise. Even Madeline seemed lost for words, her hand frozen mid-toast. In American families, public acknowledgment carries a special weight. It can undo years of quiet labor or even rewrite how a whole room remembers you. I recalled a friend whose quiet volunteer work had gone unnoticed until her name was finally read aloud at a town hall meeting. Suddenly, neighbors who'd ignored her for years saw her in a new light. Sometimes it only takes one honest voice to shift an entire narrative. Still standing there with every eye on me, I realized the applause felt different than I'd imagined. It was meaningful, but it didn't heal every scar or erase every lonely birthday. Public respect, I learned, is powerful, but fleeting. It can warm you for a moment, but it cannot fill the spaces left empty by years of doubt. The true lesson is that the recognition you seek from others must never outweigh the quiet respect you build for yourself day after day in the decisions no one else sees. As the clapping faded and the guests turned back to their celebrations, I remained seated, one hand resting lightly on my glass. For the first time, I didn't search the crowd for approval or try to guess what anyone else was thinking. I let the moment stand for itself, a rare pause in the script of my life. And as I glanced toward the doors leading out into the night, I felt the tug of another ending, a gentle invitation to close an old chapter and consider what freedom might really look like when you finally stop waiting to be seen. After the toast, the music resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted. I noticed my parents watching me from across the room, faces caught somewhere between pride and uncertainty. As the party thinned, my mother approached her steps, hesitant, holding the kind of nervous smile you wear when words have failed you before. "You look so confident tonight," she said, her voice soft. There was a question behind her praise, a silent wondering if after all these years she had misunderstood the shape of my happiness. My father joined us, offering a gentle squeeze to my shoulder, both searching for the right way to close an old gap. Their attempts at comfort felt unfamiliar, almost as if we were all meeting for the first time. For years I had yearned for their validation, believing it would finally make me whole. Yet as I stood with them beneath the bright lights and drifting confetti, I realized something had changed. Recognition that arrives late, prompted by someone else's applause, never quite fills the ache of past absence. I thought of a colleague who once shared how her father only bragged about her career after seeing her on local news. The approval was real, but it came from outside and not inside out. Letting go of that longing wasn't an act of defiance, it was an act of self-preservation. I learned that the hunger for family validation can grow so strong, it eclipses your own sense of worth, making every achievement feel incomplete. The truth is, sometimes people can't give you the recognition you crave, not because they don't love you, but because they don't know how to see you fully. This is a common thread in so many American families. Daughters and sons working themselves to the bone, hoping for a moment of pride that never quite lands where it's needed most. The small lesson I carried home that night was simple closure doesn't always come wrapped in apologies or declarations. Sometimes it comes quietly as you realize you've outgrown old needs and can forgive without forgetting. I could stand beside my parents, accept their gestures, and let their uncertainty be theirs, not mine. In doing so, I made peace with the version of me that waited years for applause and finally decided to clap for herself. The empty spaces left by others could be filled in time with my own kindness. As the wedding dwindled to laughter and distant music, I slipped out onto the terrace one last time, breathing in the cool night air. I watched the lights flicker inside, no longer searching for my place among them. The longing to be seen and chosen had faded, replaced by a gentle clarity. There in the hush before a new beginning, I sensed the invitation that awaited me beyond those doors, one that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval and everything to do with finally choosing myself. That night, standing on the quiet terrace, I realized my journey had been less about winning anyone over and more about coming home to myself. Every step walking into the ballroom alone, carrying old memories of the other sister building something in the dark and finally being recognized, had been part of shedding roles that never fit. The lessons learned at Madeline's wedding were simple, but profound. True value isn't measured by applause, and visibility doesn't replace genuine connection. Sometimes what sets you apart becomes the very foundation of your quiet strength. I thought of the women and men I'd met who carried invisible stories. Those who built quietly, who cheered from the sidelines, who found meaning outside the spotlight. Our paths may wind differently, but the ache to be seen is universal. My moment of public acknowledgment with Victor Ellis was powerful, but it couldn't heal every scar. What brought healing was the choice to let go of old longings and embrace the life I'd shaped for myself step by step. Letting go of family approval didn't mean losing my roots. It meant growing new ones sturdy and deep. As I drove home under a sky scattered with city lights, I replayed the night's events with a softer heart. The awkward praise from my parents, the unfinished conversation with Madeline, the warmth of Victor's encouragement, all were chapters in a story that no longer needed an audience to matter. The outsider label, once so heavy, had faded. In its place was a sense of freedom I never thought I'd earn. I understood now that courage isn't always about confrontation. Sometimes it's simply about standing still and letting yourself be enough. If you've ever walked into a room and felt unseen or lived with a longing for validation that never arrived, I hope my story reminds you that your worth isn't decided by anyone else's script. You can write your own one imperfect, beautiful page at a time. If this journey resonated with you, or if you saw a part of yourself in these words, I'd love to hear your story too. Please subscribe, like, and leave a comment below. Your voice is what turns a story into a community. Remember, the greatest applause is the one you give yourself.